Adrian Voss had 11 seconds left to live, and the only reason he didn't know it was that the woman who just handed him a food delivery bag was already moving before the first shot fired, because some part of her that she'd spent 3 years trying to bury had never actually stopped watching every exit in every room she walked into. That was the part of herself she thought she'd left overseas. It hadn't left. It had just been waiting. To understand how a quiet delivery driver ended up disarming a professional killer in the lobby of one of Los Angeles's most guarded penthouses, we have to go back 2 months to a parking lot at 11 p.m. and a woman who had built an entire life around being the person nobody looked at twice. Riley Cortez drove a beat-up Honda Civic with a cracked windshield and a magnetic delivery sign stuck to the door, and she had chosen that particular car, that particular job, and that particular anonymous quiet with the same tactical precision she'd once used to choose cover positions in a country she didn't talk about anymore. 3 years ago, Riley had been a staff sergeant in an Army Ranger support unit, one of a small number of women who'd made it through selection for a role that officially didn't exist on paper the way it existed in practice. She had done 2 deployments that left her with a body that still moved like a coiled spring, even when she was trying very hard to look like an ordinary tired woman delivering takeout, and a specific, exhausting hypervigilance that she managed most days by keeping her life as small and unremarkable as possible. She hadn't left the military by choice. A training incident, the details of which she didn't discuss with anyone, had ended with a medical discharge and a specific kind of guilt that didn't have a clean name, the guilt of surviving something that took people she'd trained beside. She'd come home to Los Angeles because it was the last place anyone who knew her past would think to look, and she'd taken a delivery job because it required exactly nothing from her except punctuality and a working car, no background check that dug too deep, no coworkers who'd noticed the specific way she always sat, facing the door. Her landlord, a retired Filipino nurse named Elma, who lived downstairs and had appointed herself Riley's unofficial guardian, was the only person who came close to knowing what Riley actually was. "You still check the locks 3 times, Elma said once, watching Riley's evening ritual through the kitchen window. "Every night. Same hand, same order. Habit," Riley said. Elma said, in the specific tone of a woman who'd raised 4 children and recognized a person carrying something they weren't ready to name. "Some habits keep you alive. Some habits keep you alone. You want to make sure you know which one you're running." Riley's evenings were quiet in the specific, deliberate way of someone who had decided that quiet was the only thing keeping her safe from her own memories. She delivered food 6 nights a week, ate dinner standing at her kitchen counter, and went to sleep with a baseball bat within reach of the bed, not because she expected to need it, but because sleeping without knowing exactly where a weapon was had become, somewhere in the last 3 years, physically impossible. She had told herself, repeatedly, that the version of her that used to clear rooms and read threats before they fully materialized was gone, retired along with her uniform. She believed that, mostly, until the night a delivery to a penthouse on Wilshire put her directly in the path of a man who'd been paid $200,000 to make sure Adrian Voss never made it to his next birthday. Adrian Voss ran an operation the business press described, with careful vagueness, as diversified private equity and logistics consulting. And everyone who mattered in Los Angeles's less legitimate economy understood exactly what that meant. He had built the operation from nothing over 12 years, a network that moved considerably more than capital between the ports of Long Beach and a dozen shell companies stretching from Vegas to Vancouver. And he had done it with a specific, cultivated reputation for being impossible to catch off guard. That reputation rested almost entirely on one man, Marcus Feld, his head of security for 9 years, a former federal agent Adrian had personally recruited and trusted with a completeness he extended to almost no one else in his organization. Adrian's rule, absolute and unspoken, was that security decisions ran through Feld, and Feld alone, no oversight, no second opinion, because trusting one person completely was, in Adrian's specific philosophy of power, safer than distributing trust thin enough to be compromised. What Adrian did not know What 9 years of complete trust had never once required him to question was that Marcus Feld had spent the last 8 months quietly negotiating with a rival Vegas-based syndicate looking to absorb Adrian's port contracts, and that Feld's price for delivering Adrian's death and his organization's territory intact had been set, agreed, and was scheduled for execution within the month. Adrian's one genuine vulnerability, the crack beneath 15 years of careful invulnerability, was isolation so complete it had become its own blind spot. He trusted exactly one person entirely, and that person was the one holding the knife. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday night, the kind of night that later felt obscene in its ordinariness. Riley pulled up to the service entrance of Adrian Voss's building with a delivery bag, the same route she'd run a dozen times before for a client whose name she'd never bothered to learn, penthouse tenants being, in her experience, uniformly uninterested in the person who brought their food. She was 3 steps into the marble lobby when her body registered something her conscious mind hadn't caught up to yet. A man standing near the elevator bank whose stillness was wrong. The specific coiled stillness of someone who wasn't waiting for an elevator but positioning for a line of sight. Riley's pulse didn't spike, it slowed, the old training taking over before thought could interfere, her eyes cataloging exits, angles, the slight bulge beneath his jacket that a civilian would never have clocked, and Riley clocked in under a second. Adrian Voss stepped out of the elevator at that exact moment, flanked loosely by 2 junior security staff who were, Riley understood, immediately, and with a cold clarity she hadn't felt in 3 years, positioned entirely wrong for the threat currently 6 feet away from their principal. The man by the elevator moved. Riley moved faster, the delivery bag already falling from her hand, her body remembering, in the specific, unbidden way of trained reflex, exactly how to close distance on an armed target before he could complete a draw. She hit his gun arm hard enough to redirect the barrel toward the marble floor as the first shot fired, the sound deafening in the enclosed lobby, and had his wrist locked and the weapon stripped from his hand before Adrian's own security had finished processing that an attack was happening at all. "Down," Riley said to the shooter, her voice flat and absolute, driving her knee into the back of his shoulder as he hit the floor, and it was not the voice of a delivery driver. It was the voice of someone who had said that word, in that exact tone, in situations considerably more dangerous than a Los Angeles penthouse lobby. Adrian's security finally moved, weapons drawn, shouting, the specific chaotic overcorrection of people who'd failed to prevent something and were now desperate to look useful. Adrian himself stood frozen against the elevator doors, staring at the woman in a delivery uniform who had just, with terrifying economy of motion, disarmed a professional shooter 3 feet from where he'd been standing. "Who?" Adrian said, his voice unsteady in a way it hadn't been in years. "Are you?" Riley looked up at him, still kneeling on the shooter's back, breathing controlled, and even in a way that made the 2 junior security men's panicked adrenaline look almost embarrassing by comparison. "I deliver your neighbor's Thai food on Tuesdays," she said. "Somebody should call the police, and somebody should ask why your security didn't see him." If Riley had simply handed over the situation to Adrian's stunned security team and walked out of that lobby, this would be a very short story about a lucky coincidence. Instead, what happened over the following weeks forced both of them to confront exactly how much they'd each been hiding and how dangerous it is to let the wrong person hold all your trust. Stick with this one, because the next part is where things get genuinely complicated, and if you're enjoying the ride so far, this is the perfect moment to hit that subscribe button. The police took the shooter into custody, though Adrian's own people made sure, through channels considerably faster than any court process, that the man would be considerably more forthcoming with Adrian's investigators than with any detective. Adrian, meanwhile, could not stop replaying the 11 seconds that had just happened in that lobby, and could not reconcile the woman kneeling calmly on an armed man's back with the invisible, unremarkable delivery driver he'd apparently walked past a dozen times without once actually seeing her. He found her 2 days later, not through intimidation, but through the specific careful respect of a man who had learned, in one terrifying moment, exactly how badly he'd misjudged someone. He waited outside her apartment building in the early evening, no security detail visible, which Riley noted immediately and correctly interpreted as a deliberate signal. You didn't have to come alone, she said, arms crossed, not moving from her doorway. I wanted you to understand, I'm not here to threaten you into silence, Adrian said. I'm here because you saved my life, and I don't understand who you are, and I've spent 2 days trying to find an explanation that doesn't involve you being considerably more than a delivery driver. I was Army, Riley said, after a long moment of deciding. And deciding was the right word, because saying it out loud to anyone was a door she hadn't opened in 3 years. Special operations support. I don't talk about the rest of it. I'm not asking for the rest of it, Adrian said. I'm asking what it would take for you to consider a position with my security team. Properly, trained, paid, respected for what you actually are, instead of invisible for what you're pretending to be. Riley's first instinct, the one that had kept her safe and small for 3 years, was to say no immediately, to protect the careful anonymity she'd built her entire recovery around. But something in the specific, unguarded honesty of Adrian's request, a powerful man admitting he didn't understand something and needed her help rather than demanding it, made her pause longer than she expected to. I'll think about it, she said, which was, for Riley, an enormous concession. She took the job 3 weeks later, after a conversation with Elma that ended with the older woman saying, simply, "You've been hiding from yourself for 3 years, mija. Maybe it's time you let someone actually useful see what you can do." Riley started, cautiously, as a mid-level member of Adrian's security team, her actual capabilities deliberately undersold in her file, a decision Adrian himself made and respected without question. The bond built slowly, through competence rather than anything resembling romance. Riley identified 2 structural gaps in the penthouse's security protocol within her first week that 9 years of Marcus Feld's oversight had apparently missed. Gaps Adrian noted with quiet, growing unease he didn't yet have words for. When a junior security staffer tried, clumsily, to test Riley's authority by dismissing her input in a briefing, she didn't argue. She simply demonstrated, in a controlled training exercise Adrian happened to observe, exactly why her assessment should carry weight, disarming 2 trained security staff in under 4 seconds without raising her voice once. "You don't perform for an audience," Adrian said to her one evening, watching her methodically clean and reassemble a sidearm with the unhurried precision of someone who'd done it 1,000 times. "Most people in this business want credit for what they can do. You just do it. Performing gets people killed," Riley said. "I learned that the hard way." She didn't elaborate, and Adrian, for once, didn't push. In return, one night reviewing security footage together, long after the rest of the staff had gone home, Adrian told her, quietly, about the specific isolation of running an empire built on a single relationship of total trust, about a father who'd taught him that vulnerability in this business got you killed, about the particular loneliness of a man who had never once, in 15 years, let anyone close enough to actually protect him rather than simply work for him. "I trusted one person completely," Adrian admitted. "It never occurred to me that complete trust and no oversight are the same door, just with different names." Marcus Feld had been Adrian's head of security for 9 years, a former federal agent with a reputation for meticulous, unquestionable competence, trusted with access to every security protocol, every safehouse location, every detail of Adrian's movements that would matter enormously to anyone planning to end his life. Feld's motive was old and specific in the way most betrayals are. 8 months ago, a Vegas syndicate, looking to absorb Adrian's Long Beach port contracts, had approached Feld with an offer that solved a problem Adrian never knew existed: a gambling debt Feld had buried under his federal pension and considerable personal shame, one that had grown, through a specific escalating desperation, past the point where Feld believed he had any option except the one currently in motion. Riley noticed the warning signs within her first 2 weeks, the particular things a trained eye catches that an untrained one dismisses as coincidence. Feld's insistence on personally handling certain logistics that should have been delegated, a pattern in his scheduling that created small, unexplained gaps in coverage during specific windows. The way Feld's eyes moved to her a fraction too long whenever her security assessments contradicted his own. She raised it once, carefully, with Adrian, and watched him do the thing powerful men do when 9 years of trust collides with a new employee's suspicion. "Marcus has been with me since before this operation had real money in it," Adrian said. "He's not the problem, Riley." "I didn't say he was the problem," Riley said. I said, his security gaps line up too neatly to be accidents. Adrian didn't dismiss her outright, but he didn't act either. The specific paralysis of a man whose entire operating philosophy depended on one relationship being unquestionable. It would take a second attempt on his life to finally force the question neither of them wanted to ask out loud. The escalation came fast. Once Feld understood his first attempt's failure had introduced an unknown variable into a plan he'd spent 8 months perfecting. Riley's own background, carefully buried for 3 years, became a target the moment Feld's Vegas contacts started digging into who exactly had disarmed their hired shooter in 11 seconds flat. It took them 4 days to find her service record, heavily redacted but enough to identify her former unit, and from there, enough to locate Elma's building and understand exactly what leverage a woman who'd built her entire recovery around protecting one elderly landlord and one small quiet apartment might respond to. Riley found Elma's front door forced open on a Thursday evening, the apartment ransacked in a way that told her immediately, and with the specific cold clarity of trained assessment, that this wasn't a robbery. It was a message, deliberately clumsy, meant to look amateur while communicating something considerably more precise. We know who you are, and we know what you love. Elma herself was safe, having been at a church function during the break-in, but the specific violation of the one space Riley had built her fragile recovery around broke something loose in her that 3 years of careful invisibility had kept locked down. She found the discovery that unraveled everything 2 nights later, reviewing security logs Feld had personally handled during the exact windows both attempts had occurred, a pattern of access timestamps that, cross-referenced against Feld's personal phone records Riley pulled, using resources considerably more thorough than her official job description technically allowed, connected directly to encrypted communications with a known Vegas-based syndicate account. She brought it to Adrian at 2 a.m., laying the evidence out on his desk with the same controlled economy she'd used to disarm a shooter weeks earlier. "Your head of security has been feeding your movements to the people trying to kill you," she said. "For 8 months. He's the reason that shooter knew exactly where to stand." Adrian stared at the evidence for a long time, the specific stillness of a man watching 9 years of complete trust collapse in real time. "Marcus," he said, and it wasn't a question. "I need you to trust me on how we handle this," Riley said. "Not with violence, with something that actually ends it permanently instead of starting a war neither of us can fully control." The confrontation happened in Adrian's own security office. Feld summoned for what he believed was a routine briefing, walking into a room where Adrian sat waiting with the financial records of Feld's gambling debt and the encrypted communication logs laid out plainly on the desk between them. Riley standing quietly by the door, not menacing, simply present. 9 years, Adrian said, his voice level in a way that made it considerably more unsettling than shouting would have. "I trusted you with everything, Marcus. My movements, my family history, every vulnerability I have. And you sold all of it for a gambling debt you were too proud to tell me about." Feld's composure, built over 9 years of careful federal agent poise, cracked slowly rather than all at once. "You don't understand what they had on me, Adrian. The debt was going to destroy everything, my pension, my name, so you decided my life was an acceptable price for your name," Adrian said. "You sent men to my building. You let a woman who works for me get her home broken into to send me a message." He slid the folder across the desk. "This goes to federal investigators either way. The only question is whether you cooperate on the Vegas syndicate's full operation or whether you go down alone protecting people who never once protected you." Riley watched Feld's face cycle through the specific stages of a man realizing every exit had been closed: calculation, denial, and finally, the flat resignation of someone who understood the game had ended considerably more decisively than he'd planned for. "She's not what she looks like," Feld said finally, glancing at Riley with something between resentment and grudging recognition. "None of my contacts flagged her properly. That was the mistake. That was the whole point," Riley said quietly. "Being underestimated is the safest place to operate from. You should have known that. You used to be federal." Feld cooperated fully within the hour. The Vegas syndicate's operation dismantled through a joint federal task force investigation that Adrian's own lawyers quietly, carefully facilitated, ensuring Adrian's own less legitimate operations stayed several careful layers removed from the resulting prosecution. 3 months later, Adrian's penthouse security operated under an entirely restructured protocol, Oversight distributed rather than concentrated in a single relationship of total trust, a lesson Adrian had learned in the most expensive way possible and had no intention of forgetting. Riley now ran that security team, her actual background no longer something she buried, her service record acknowledged rather than hidden, though she still, some nights, checked the locks 3 times in the same hand, same order, a habit Elma had been right to call exactly what it was.